Alright, so another problem I have with this quad is it's burning oil, and that could be coming from one or two places. It could be coming from the cylinder and seeping up past the rings, which would mean that the rings are worn out and it would need a rebuild. Or it could be coming from a valve guide. Now, I think it's the valve guide because if your rings were bad, it would have low compression, and this engine feels really, really strong still. So what we're going to do is do a compression test. If the valve guides are bad, then that wouldn't affect the compression at all because the oil would only be seeping in when the valve is open. So when the valve is closed, it won't. The compression will still be good. So what we're going to do is do a compression test, and if this engine still has good compression, then that means we're losing oil through a valve guide, and all we need to do is replace the valve guide. So in order to compression test it, we're just going to remove this spark plug boot and then pull off the spark plug. You can see right in there. And then we're going to stick a compression tester gauge in and then crank it over and we'll read what it says. Alright, so now as you can see, I have the compression tester screwed into the spark plug hole, and that just runs to this gauge. And so now we just have to crank it over and see what we get. Alright, it looks like we got just about 120 psi. Alright, so now I looked up what the compression should be on this quad, and it says that the minimum should be 114, so that means we're good. So now that means that the valve guides are bad, which is a good thing because that means I don't have to take the whole engine apart to fix this problem. So all I need to do to fix that is take the cylinder head off, which I had to do anyway because I have to replace a head gasket, and then I just have to take out the valves and then replace the valve guide. Alright, so I'm in the process of removing the head here. As you can see, I already removed the plastics. And so in order to remove the head, we're gonna take off these bolts, and then we're gonna get to the camshaft gear, and we're gonna loosen this bolt so that we can loosen the chain up, the timing chain, and then we should be able to take the gear off and continue with removing the head. Alright, so I got that cover off and the chain tensioner loosened, and I pulled the bolt out of here. So now what I have to do is take this cam gear off, and you can see I have a string attached to the chain so that I don't lose it down in the engine. And then we should be able to take the cylinder head bolts off and pull the head. Alright, so I got the cover here off and the cover here to make sure it is at top dead center. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a T there. And then I made sure that the sprocket up there was also at top dead center. And then I went ahead and removed this bolt, and then just basically pulled it. Oh, and I removed the tensioner here, and then just pulled the sprocket off. You can see I have a chain, string holding the chain here from falling into the engine. But I think I'm going to have to remove the gas tank to really be able to get to the cylinder head bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I got the gas tank off. I also removed the two bolts for the carb here so that this is disconnected. And obviously I removed the spark plug. I also have to remove the bolts here for the exhaust, and then we should be good to take, oh, and I have to take these off, these two brackets, but other than that we should be good to take the head off. Alright, so these are the cylinder head bolts. There's one here, right there, then here, and right there. And then you have to remove these two bolts, which are an Allen head. And we're going to be removing those in a crisscross pattern so that we don't bend the head, and then we should be able to just pull it right out. Alright, so I got the head completely taken off. It was a little tricky to get it to fit through the frame, but I was able to get it. You just got to make sure you take the bolts out all the way, or else they start catching on things in here. And then once you're taking it off, since this string was going through the head before, you got to pull it off partially, and then attach the string underneath the head that you're going to take off, and then attach a different string and cut the old one off so that you don't lose this chain down there, and you can still take the old head off. So here it is. The reason I took this off is you guys saw it needs the new valve guides, which I have here, and it also needs new head gasket, so I'll be installing that as well. So now the first thing we're going to do is to get to the valve guides is we're going to take these two covers off, and that'll expose the top of the valve, and then we will be able to pull the springs off and the retainers so that we can get to the valve guides, or valve seals, sorry. Alright, so now I got those two covers off, and you can see the head of the valve, the retaining ring, and then the rockers. And the other thing we need to do is we need to remove the camshaft. So in order to do that, we have to take out these two bolts, and then these clamps will come off, and then we should be able to pull the cam right out. Alright, so now that these two bolts are out and the clamps are off, in order to pull this out, I'm just going to thread this screw in there, and then just like that, pulls right out. Alright, so I got the valve retainer and the valve springs out, and I did that by, I don't have a valve removal tool or a valve compressor for this kind of engine, so what I did was I made this out of a PVC pipe. I just cut a piece away there for the rocker to fit in, and then a spot here where I could go in and remove the two retaining clips off of the valve stem, and it worked pretty good. So what it does is it just goes on there, and then you clamp this side goes on the valve spring retainer, and then the other side goes in the bottom of the valve so that doesn't move. But you could see in here that right there, that little green thing, that's the valve seal. So what we need to do is take the valve out. Do that by just pushing it through out of the side, and then right there we got to get pliers, and it should pull right out, and then they come off just like that. So right now I'm doing the exhaust valve. You can see I have the piece of pipe there on the valve, and you can see the retaining clips are starting to poke out. I just have to tighten this clamp a little bit more, and we'll be able to pull those out. And we just loosen up the clamp, and the springs will be loose, and we can pull them right off. So one of them just fell off, and both of them just fell off. Okay, now we just have to loosen this up. You can just pull these right off, and make sure you know which is the top of the valve and which is the bottom. They are directional like that, and so you want to make sure you keep them in order. I'm going to put those aside. Again, pop out the valve, just push it right through, just come right off, and then pull that seal out. Alright, so I got the new one on, and the new valve. I just pushed that through, and it feels much tighter than the old ones. So now we're just going to put the valve springs back on. Make sure they're on good. And then we're going to use that compressor tool to recompress them, and then reinstall the two retaining clips. Alright, so you can see I got one assembled all back together. I used a little bit of grease to make these clips stay in, or retainers stay in. so that I could rotate one around and have it stay without falling off. And that worked pretty good. And then I just released that clamp and it went right in. So now it's time to do the other side. Alright, so now I have the head assembled back together. We're ready to put it on. I just cleaned off all the old gasket on both the head and the quad itself. You can use a wire wheel or a brass wire wheel to remove the old head gasket, but a good trick is to just use a little bit of carb cleaner and rub that on there with a paper towel, and that'll loosen up the old gasket pretty good, and then you don't run the risk of having metal pieces or dust inside of your engine. So we're ready to put this thing back on now. What I need to do is just cut this old head gasket off. I have a new one. And then basically just put the new head gasket on, put the head on, and bolt everything back together. Alright, so I have the head just resting on it right now. I installed the new head gasket. You want to make sure you put a new one in there, because if you use the old one, it might not seal correctly. I have all the bolts just resting in here, and we're going to tighten them. The tightening sequence on this thing is, this one is first, this one's second, third, fourth, fifth, and then sixth. And these ones get torqued to 29 foot-pounds, and these ones to get torqued to 14 foot-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so I got the head bolts torqued. That went pretty good. So now what we have to do is install the cam gear, and before you do that, you need to make sure that, well, first you need to remove the timing plug, and if you look in there, you can see it has a T, and that indicates that the piston is at top dead center. And then you have to look at your cam over here. You have to line this mark with the one on the top here. So after you do that, you want to pull your cam or your timing chain up. Make sure you have it on a string so it doesn't fall in there. You're going to put the chain onto the timing gear, and then just install the timing gear, and then for now just hand tighten that bolt. That cam sprocket in. It was a pain to get in. You kind of just have to work the chain around this side of the sprocket while pushing it against this side. And then what I did was, when it got to like here and it was on the teeth until here, you can't really pull the chain over anymore. So what I did was I just got a socket and a ratchet and turned this over a little bit while kind of holding the cam to force the chain to go all the way around. Once it worked itself all the way around, I turned it back to top dead center, and it wasn't lining up with this, this dash wasn't lining up with that mark on the top there. So what I had to do was kind of just move the sprocket down to the bottom a little bit and work the chain around so that the sprocket, link by link, until the sprocket lined up with that. And so you can see now it's all lined up. It's at top dead center, and these two ticks are lining up. So that's what you want. And then once you do that and they're lining up, you want to put your finger in the chain tensioner hole, and then you push against that to remove the slack and make sure that those ticks are still aligned. And you can even, while you're pushing against this, move the engine over a little bit and make sure it's still aligned to make sure you got all the slack out. And I did that, and it's still all aligned. So now what I have to do is just torque this down, and that gets torqued to 43 foot-pounds. And the way you do this is, obviously you have your torque wrench on this one, torque that one down, and to make sure that the engine doesn't move, you just put another socket and ratchet on this bolt. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now it's time to install the cam chain tensioner. So in order to do that, you have to take off the bolt on the top of this and the spring. You can see those are right there. And then you push in this little lever here, and then you can slide this assembly all the way in. So once you do that, get a new gasket for it. I have new gaskets on there. And we're going to go ahead and install this with the little lever here facing down. So it's going to go in like that. Alright, so I got the chain tensioner mounted in there, and now it's time to install this. So you got the spring, the washer here, and the bolt. So we just put that in there like so. And you'll hear the that pin clicking down. And then once this is tightened, you have to tighten that to 27 foot-pounds. Alright, so I got that screw torqued down. Now what we have to do is I'm just going to start putting everything back together. Really, got to bolt in the carb there. You got to put the cover on here, put the plug back on there. Anything really that I took off, the muffler, and then after that put on the plastics.